Hey, what's happening, A-Push kids? We're back for our next lecture here in AP US History. Today we're going to be looking at 3.6, the influence of revolutionary ideas. We have two learning objectives that we're going to be hitting up really quickly today. The first one is 3F, explain the various ways the American Revolution affected society. And 3G, describe the global impact of the American Revolution. Some of the stuff, especially from 3G, should sound familiar for you, especially for those of you that took AP World History. So a lot of it's kind of a repeat of some of the information there. We have a few key ideas today. Our first one says, during and after the American Revolution, increased awareness of inequalities in society motivated some individuals and groups to call for the abolition of slavery and greater political democracy in the new state and national governments. So what exactly does that mean? So first of all, when we look at equality after the Revolutionary War, we see that there is this push for the abolition of slavery. There's a large group of people who start to realize that the ideals of the revolution, these ideas that all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, don't exactly mesh up really well with these concepts of slavery that we have in our country. And so we start to see states, especially those in the North, start to push for the abolition of slavery. Probably the best example is out of Pennsylvania, which always really had a very small slave population. And they're going to pass a gradual abolition law in 1780. This prohibits the importation of slaves. All children born in Pennsylvania would be free, even if their parents were slaves. And it becomes a model for many other northern states to follow. New York passes a similar law. Though slavery will continue in many of these states, the last slave in New York, for instance, doesn't die until I think 1832 or 1836. So it's quite a bit later. States like Massachusetts get rid of it a little bit more quickly. Now, in addition to this, beyond slaves, women also start to push for equality as well. Probably the most famous of these is Abigail Adams. She was the wife of John Adams, the famous revolutionary. Eventually, he's going to become the second president of the United States. And she and him write back and forth to each other many times. In fact, when they're creating the new government, she writes to him and asks him to, quote-unquote, remember the ladies. Unfortunately, he does not remember them. And women are still left out, at least politically, from society at this particular time. Other women, such as Judith Sargent Murray, advocates for the education for females, and there is a push for more local involvement in women, especially in elections. Though for the most part, at the national level, women are still, for the most part, excluded. This then brings us to key idea number 2, which is, in response to women's participation in the American Revolution, Enlightenment ideas, and women's appeal to expanded roles, an ideal of Republican motherhood gained popularity. It called on women to teach Republican values within the family and granted women a new importance in American political culture. Now, this doesn't mean that they had the ability to vote. They still were denied that right on a national basis and, for the most part, on a local basis as well. But this concept of Republican motherhood is this idea that women were expected to instill Republican values in children and into families. Now, this is not yet the idea that a woman's role is solely within the household. That is an idea that's called separate spheres, and that won't really come into place until much later. That won't come into place until the mid-1800s. And that's more of an economic concept, that a woman's role was to stay at home and a man's role was to go out and work. We still really have to understand that most Americans at this time are small farmers. And so everybody's role is as a farmer. They may have different roles within that farm and what they're doing, but their economic role is much the same. However, this is a change in the social role of women. Women now are expected to be able to teach those Republican values, those ideals of the American Revolution, those Enlightenment ideals to their children. We also do see with Republican motherhood increased educational opportunities for women. Women are expected to be educated in American society, something that we don't see in many other parts of the world. A third major social impact of the American Revolution is a worldwide impact, and that leads us to key idea number 3. The American Revolution and the ideals set forth in the Declaration of Independence reverberated in France, Haiti, and Latin America, inspiring future independence movements. And this was something you guys covered in world history. So these ideals of the Declaration of Independence have these really worldwide impacts. And we see this first happening in France. The French were inspired by the ideals of equality to start their own revolution. We see that as the Third Estate really fights against those first two estates in France. In addition, in Haiti, the Haitians, which were mostly slaves at this point, rebel against, ironically, the French, also inspired by the American Revolution. Interestingly enough, Haiti becomes the first free nation in the Caribbean, a nation led by former slaves. And further on south, we see Latin American colonies would follow this American example, and they start to establish their own independence. On the map, which if you're watching on your phone, some of the dates may be a little hard for you to see, but you can see that in the early 1800s, many South American nations, such as Bolivia, Paraguay, which in 1825 and 1828, Uruguay in 1828, Argentina in 1816, are all starting to gain their independence from both Spain and from Portugal. And what this does is this starts to open up a whole new set of countries that are based on the ideals of our revolution. So, in summary, really quick lecture today, what we have is we've got three main ideas. Number one, the ideals in the revolution have impacts not only on African Americans in our country and the institution of slavery, it also has an impact on the role of women, as women are expected now to teach the ideals of the revolution, what's called Republican motherhood, and the ideals of the revolution have an international impact, specifically on France, Haiti, and on Latin America. Now, until next time, go Pack.